The year is 1864. A warm wind sweeps across the port of Veracruz, carrying the scent of salt and gunpowder. On the horizon, a European ship appears, white sails glinting under the Mexican sun. On its deck stands a man in his early 30s, his face pale, his uniform pristine, his heart full of hope. His name is Ferdinand Maximilian of Habsburg, younger brother of the Emperor of Austria, heir to one of Europe's most ancient dynasties. And soon he will be crowned Emperor of Mexico. He believes he is sailing toward glory, toward a noble mission that will bring peace and prosperity to a land torn apart by civil war. But history knows what he does not. He is not heading toward an empire. He is sailing toward his death. To understand how a European prince ended up on Mexican soil, we must look at the world that made him. The mid-19th century was an age of ambition. Steamships crossed the oceans, telegraphs connected continents, and empires dreamed of expanding beyond their borders. France, under Emperor Napoleon III, sought to restore the old grandeur of the Napoleonic name. The United States was engulfed in its own civil war, and Latin America, recently freed from Spain, was a region in turmoil, struggling to define its identity. Mexico, perhaps more than any other nation, embodied that struggle. Since gaining independence in 1821, it had been a country of constant upheaval. Presidents rising and falling, constitutions rewritten, revolutions erupting like summer storms. By the 1850s, two visions of the nation had torn it apart: the conservatives who defended tradition, the church, and centralized authority, and the liberals, led by Benito Juárez, who dreamed of a secular democratic republic. Their clash culminated in the Reform War, a brutal civil conflict that left Mexico exhausted and nearly bankrupt. When Juárez finally triumphed in 1861, he inherited an empty treasury. To stabilize the nation, he suspended foreign debt payments for 2 years. That single decision would change history. In Europe, creditors demanded repayment. France, Spain, and Britain sent fleets to Mexico to recover their money. But behind the official reason, Napoleon III saw a far grander opportunity. While the United States was too busy fighting itself, France could establish a new Latin Catholic empire in the Americas, a counterweight to the Northern Republic. He imagined Mexico as a jewel of French influence, an empire guided by European order and faith. But for this empire to exist, it needed an emperor. Napoleon's eyes turned toward Austria, toward the young and idealistic archduke who lived in a palace overlooking the Adriatic Sea, Immerse Castle. Maximilian was known for his elegance, his kindness, and his fascination with distant cultures. He loved art, science, and the sea. Unlike his stern brother Franz Joseph, he was a romantic. When French diplomats approached him with the proposal to rule a grateful Mexican people who longed for a monarch, Maximilian hesitated, then accepted. He saw it as destiny, a divine calling to bring enlightenment to a young nation. His wife, Carlotta of Belgium, shared his vision. Together, they imagined a tropical empire of justice, progress, and beauty, a land where European refinement would meet American vitality. But the dream was built on deception. The invitation to rule Mexico had come from a small group of conservative exiles, not from the nation itself. The majority of Mexicans, led by Juárez, rejected the idea of a foreign emperor. What awaited Maximilian in the New World was not a throne, but a trap. In May 1864, after a long voyage across the Atlantic, the imperial couple arrived in Veracruz. Instead of jubilant crowds, they found empty streets. The air was thick with heat and indifference. Local officials offered formal greetings, but the silence of the people spoke louder. "They will come to love us," Maximilian told Carlotta. "We must show them we are not conquerors." They traveled inland toward Mexico City, escorted by French troops and Mexican conservatives. The journey was both magnificent and foreboding. Deserts stretching endlessly, volcanoes looming over the horizon, ancient ruins half buried in dust. At every stop, the imperial entourage staged ceremonies, arches of flowers, music, and proclamations of loyalty. But beyond the main roads, rebellion simmered. From his residence at Chapultepec Castle, Maximilian began to shape his vision of empire. He opened the palace gardens to the public, held audiences with peasants, and signed decrees to improve education and labor conditions. He even abolished child labor and sought to limit the power of the clergy. Ironically, the man chosen by conservatives to restore monarchy ruled with liberal ideals. But ideals could not protect him. The empire's foundation was military, and its strength depended entirely on the French army. Beyond the capital, guerrilla warfare raged. Juárez and his Republican forces never surrendered. They moved constantly, city to city, desert to mountain, keeping alive the dream of the Republic. By 1866, the tide had turned. The American Civil War had ended, and the victorious United States demanded that France withdraw under the Monroe Doctrine. Napoleon III, facing his own troubles in Europe, agreed. French troops began to leave Mexico. Maximilian suddenly found himself emperor of an empty palace, abandoned by France, isolated from Europe, and surrounded by enemies. Advisors begged him to abdicate and flee. Even his brother in Vienna ordered him home. But Maximilian refused. "I cannot leave," he said. "I came to rule with honor, and I will die with honor." Meanwhile, Carlota embarked on a desperate mission to save the empire. She sailed to Europe, begging Napoleon III, then Pope Pius IX, to intervene. She pleaded, wept, and implored them to send help. But the world had moved on. No army would return to Mexico. The pressure broke her mind. She suffered a mental collapse and spent the rest of her life in seclusion, believing her husband was still alive. Back in Mexico, Maximilian's fate was sealed. In early 1867, Republican forces surrounded the imperial stronghold of Querétaro. Hunger and disease spread. Loyal generals like Miramon and Mejia fought bravely, but betrayal was inevitable. One night, a colonel opened the city gates to the enemy. Maximilian was captured. His trial was swift, conducted by a Republican court determined to make an example of him. Juárez himself hesitated to authorize the execution, but pressure from his generals and the collective memory of foreign invasion left no room for mercy. On June 19, 1867, Maximilian faced the firing squad at Cerro de las Campanas. He wore a dark suit and a straw hat. In his hand, he held a photograph of Carlota. Before the soldiers raised their rifles, he spoke softly. "May my blood be the last that is shed for the good of this country. Viva Mexico." The volley of shots echoed across the hills. The dream of a Mexican empire ended in smoke. His body was returned to Europe, embalmed and silent, received by his brother Franz Joseph without ceremony. Carlota never recovered. For 60 years, she lived hidden from the world, wandering the halls of her Belgian palace, speaking to ghosts. In Mexico, the Republic triumphed. Juárez re-established sovereignty, and the nation began to rebuild, weary but proud. The empire had lasted just 3 years, yet its story remains one of the most haunting episodes in the 19th century. Maximilian's tragedy was not merely political. It was the tragedy of a man trapped between two worlds. A European idealist who believed that good intentions could overcome history, that love could conquer politics, and that an empire could be built on kindness. He discovered too late that nations are not ruled by dreams. Today, Chapultepec Castle still overlooks Mexico City. Once the heart of his empire, now a museum of history. Tourists walk through its grand halls, past portraits of Maximilian and Carlota, past the balcony where they once waved to crowds that never came. Outside, the modern city pulses with life, loud, chaotic, free. The Mexico that Maximilian could never understand has endured. And yet his story still lingers in the air like a ghostly whisper carried by the wind, the tale of an emperor who came to rule a nation that never wanted him, who believed he could bring peace to a land still healing from conquest. History has long debated who Maximilian truly was. To some, he was a foreign usurper, a symbol of imperial arrogance. To others, he was a tragic figure, an idealist destroyed by forces beyond his control. Perhaps he was both. A man of contradiction, caught between the light of progress and the shadows of empire. On the hill where he died, a small chapel now stands. Its stones bear silent witness to a dream that vanished under the Mexican sun. And so, as the narrator's voice fades, the question remains, echoing across time and across continents. Was Maximilian of Habsburg a conqueror, or a dreamer who simply stepped onto the wrong shore of history?